This is gonna be a fun video for me to try and describe any of these and my love of them, other than just being like, rate it. Yes, because that's it. Hello everyone, my name is Jenna, but you guys can call me Jen, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to an updated my favorite books of all time list. So we have 15 favorite books to talk about, and then the 5 honorary mentions. So we're just gonna get into the 5 honorary mentions. Okay, we'll start with this one. This is A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, and this is a stand-in for that whole Wayfarers series that I have on my shelves. Because this is not my favorite in the Wayfarers series, and I couldn't actually tell you which one is my favorite anymore, because it's been a while since I've read them, and it was originally Close and Common Orbit, which is book 2, and then I was like, no, book 4 is my favorite. It's been so long I need to reread these, which I am planning to do very soon, to reread and live in my best Becky Chambers life. These books are absolutely exceptional. Even though I didn't really love book 3 all that much, there is something about Becky Chambers and her writing that just works for me. She has a knack for combining the big space operatic worlds with these really minuscule, tender human moments. Not even human moments, just like people moments, I guess, because she deals with species that aren't human most of the time and just boils it right down to that moment. It's so cozy. It's so wonderful. I cannot talk enough about these books. I love the Wayfarer series so much. I will read anything Becky Chambers writes. Anything. Then we have this book here, which is Realmbreaker by Victoria Aveyard. This is one of my favorite YA fantasies ever. For a long time, considered it one of my favorite books of all time, but it has slowly eked its way out because it's been a while since I've read this. I need to reread it to solidify its place and also continue with the series because I have the second one on my shelves and it's been on my shelves for a long time because I'm scared of it. That's really truly why, because this was just absolutely perfection. This is exactly what I want in a fantasy book, especially a YA fantasy book, because as you guys know, I've been falling out of love with YA fantasy for such a long time now, and I can confidently say I am out of love with YA fantasy. I'm done with it pretty much. There are select few books that do break that rule, and that's okay. And I will read YA fantasy every once in a while just to see if I'm really interested in the premise, but usually they just don't work for me. But this one really did, because I think it does a absolutely masterful job of combining what I love about epic fantasy and making it so readable in a YA fantasy form. It is third person, it follows multi-POVs, it has exceptional world building, and it's just such a delicious story, and you can feel the love and care that Victoria Aveyard has put in this series. Like, I've read the first book of her other series, Red Queen, and reading that and then reading this, like, this is an entirely different world, an entirely different level, an entirely different friggin' ranking system than Red Queen, because Red Queen follows that traditional 2010s YA books that are just kind of angsty and really compulsively readable. Are they good though? Who's to say? This is exceptional for its so many reasons. I need to reread this. This is gonna be a theme throughout this video, and I actually wanted to ask you guys a question. If you would watch a reading vlog where I reread some of my favorite books where I'm a little on the fence about them being favorites, because it's been so long since I've read them, and you guys know how terrible my memory is. And I feel so strange calling a book a favorite when I've only read it for like one time over. But sometimes books just hit, you know? They just move your entire universe when you read them. That is what I've considered most of my favorites here. They've moved my universe, they've shifted my outlook on the world and my life, and or like the genre as a whole that I'm reading it in. Would you guys watch a vlog of me rereading some of my favorite books of all time? Tell me in the comments below. And I also want to know your top 5 favorite books of all time, if you can narrow it down. I know it's so difficult to narrow, but I love hearing about what people's favorite books are. All right, on that same note, I also have Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This one I've read multiple times now, and I've adored it every single time that I've read it, and I've constantly said it is my favorite YA or one of my favorite YA books of all time. Depends on the mood and the year that I read other books in. But this one is just so stunning, and it hits every time I read it. There is something about Laini Taylor's writing, and this story in particular, that just gets me. It's slower, it's methodical, it's a story about a boy who just loves stories and wants to follow that dream of unearthing more stories, and there's something about like slower, beautiful books that just get to me, you know? And this is one of those. It was groundbreaking when I read it for the first time for me. And that's why it is on a honorary mentions list, because I just don't know if it is a top favorite anymore, because it's been a while since I've reread it. I don't know. And I have read the second one, The Muse of Nightmares, and it is one of my favorite duologies of all time. I just love it so much. I just love it so much. I also wanted to talk about this chunky boy here, Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. I felt wrong not having a Brandon on my favorites list, because the previous video that I did 2 years ago had The Way of Kings on my favorites list and Mistborn on my favorites list, and those are still some of my favorite fantasies of all time. Words of Radiance beats those both out of the water like crazy. This is such a exceptional feat in storytelling. I loved this from start to finish of this more than 1,000-page tome. It's a sequel too, like it's the second book in the Stormlight Archives. I love it so much more than The Way of Kings. It just expanded the story so much more. I love these characters so much. I love what Brandon is doing with the magic systems and the world building, and you guys know how much I love Brandon Sanderson and his world building. Every time I read a Brandon, I don't shut up about his world building, because you guys know how much I love world building. If you don't, you now know. I have an inherent love of world building. It's my favorite thing in stories ever. Like, if world building isn't great, I don't like the book as much. Like, it is a quintessential aspect of my enjoyment of a story, and Brandon kills it with the world building. Anyways, this is a honorary mention because it just doesn't quite fit the mold of a top favorite book, but it is so close. So I had to mention it because how could I not? This was exceptional when I read it at the end of last year, beginning of this year. It just, everything about this is perfect. The next one I have on this list is one of the ones that I need to reread to see if it actually does qualify as a favorite for an honorary mention. And it's the last honorary mention of this video before we dive into the actual list, because it gave me the same feelings of my favorite book of all time. Like, when I read this book, I said that it was in a league of its own. Like, I couldn't compare it to other books, and it gave me the feeling that my favorite book of all time did. But I don't know if this is a favorite book. Like, if it goes in the top 15, if you will. And that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, which is surprising to not only you and me, because V.E. Schwab doesn't necessarily fit a favorite author of mine. Most of their books just don't work for me in a favorites capacity. Like, they're pretty good books. V.E. Schwab knows how to write a damn book. And their writing is just incredible, and just the turn of phrase that V.E. Schwab has is something that really works for me. But as for the rest of her books, none of them have really hit like this one did. Got a phone call. Everything's a mess. But yes, Addie LaRue, honorary mention, because it made me feel like my favorite book of all time, but I need to reread it to solidify it. This book is out of this world. It's in a league of its own, for me, at least. It's just so wonderful, so beautiful. Okay, we're gonna get into the list. Favorite books of all time. This isn't really in any order, except for like the top numero uno, you know? But you guys have heard me talk about these books on my channel over and over and over again. Majority of them are fantasy. I think there's like maybe one sci-fi, possibly. There are 2 classics and 1 literary fiction. Welcome to my channel. Hi, I love fantasy. Anyways, okay, we're gonna start with The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Shuri. Honestly, it was a toss-up between this one and its sequel, The Oleander Sword, which you can't see because I'm on a different camera mode. It was a toss-up because The Oleander Sword is arguably better than this one, to me at least. But I've read this one 2 times. It is just such an exceptional read. I am so in love with Tasha Shuri's writing, with her relationships, with her world building, that I had to put the first of this trilogy on this list because it's just absolutely stunning. Every time I've reread this now twice, every time I read it, I just love it even more. It's so good, so fantastic. We love to see it, truly. It's sapphic, it's gay. Yes. Speaking of sapphic and gay, The Prior of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This was almost an honorary mention, but then I remembered just how much I loved it, and the fact that when I reread it last year, it just solidified itself as like a favorite of all time, a favorite fantasy book of all time. Dragons. It's a fantasy standalone. Even though it has a prequel, they stand on their own. They're just in the same world and have like connections through characters and stuff like that, but this is an epic story, my friends. I don't know how to explain it. It's Samantha Shannon's writing. It's her relationships. It's the mastery of storytelling. It's the slow, churning, soft that builds into something insane and epic. It's just, yeah. Yes. I guess we're just gonna go through the stack slowly one by one. The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow. This is the only non-fantasy or sci-fi book on this list, other than the two classics that are gonna follow. This book I've only read once, and because of that I almost didn't include it on this list, but when I thought about this book and when I look at this book, I just know in my heart of hearts that it is the favorite book of all time for me. It hits. It gives me the warm, fuzzy feeling that Jane Austen's books do. It feels like coming home. That's exactly what I want in a book. That is what I want in a romantic book that just sweeps me away. This was everything. As I said, felt like a Jane Austen book, felt like coming home. It was perfectly done. The romance in here is beautiful. The reimagination of Mary as a character, Mary Bennett, is the best. Like in this, she is my favorite Bennett sister. If I considered this canon for the Jane Austen world of Pride and Prejudice, Mary Bennett becomes my favorite character because of this book. I relate so hard to Mary Bennett in here. This is it's everything. Fuck, I don't even know how to describe my feelings towards these books. This is, yeah. There it is. Just hand gestures at this point. Okay, we'll go to those classics because I mentioned them. Emma and Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Some of my favorite books of all time. If not, like, top 5. My friends, like, they will always forever be my favorite books of all time. I have read them both multiple times over. Every time I come into them, it's coming home, just like The Other Bennett Sister. It's exceptional. I will devour the media around these as well, especially the 1995 BBC Pride and Prejudice and the 2020 Emma. They are just my favorites. Jane Austen is one of my favorite authors of all time and has been for so many years. I studied these in university. They are just prime, okay? They are the blueprint for romances and what I love in romances. Emma Knightley, iconic. The humor in Emma, iconic. I don't even care that Knightley's like 13 years Emma's senior or something. Like, I don't care. He's the best. Darcy and Lizzie in here, the best. And not only do we have them, we also have Bingley and Jane, who are my blueprint and what I want in life. These are everything to me, and I will reread these classics until I die. That's it. That's it. Signed, sealed, delivered. So we talked about Becky Chambers previously, but I also have to tell you that The Psalm for the Wild Build, or A Psalm for the Wild Build, sorry, is one of my favorite books of all time. I was gonna talk about this and Prayer, which is the sequel, but I don't think I can conflate them into one reading experience because the experience I had reading Psalm for the first time before Prayer was even out is in a league of its own for me. Like, this book hit at the exact right time in my life that I needed it. Just asked so many questions and opened my mind to these discussions, and it just made me feel okay to feel like I'm falling behind as a human. You know, when I read this at the time, I felt like I was falling behind, and, you know, everyone goes at their own pace. And this says that it's okay to go slow. It's okay to take your time with life, and nothing will compare to the feeling that this book gave me. Reading the sequel was also exceptional, and maybe one day these two will become like one reading experience as a whole for me as I reread them and like read them one after the other kind of a thing, but Psalm just stands above. If you watched my previous favorites video of all time a couple years ago, you will know that H.M. Long Hollow Smoke is one of my favorite fantasy books of all time, is one of my favorite books of all time. This year, I read Dark Water Daughter, which favorite book of the year so far. New favorite book of all time. So now I'm talking about both of these because I cannot pick which one trumps the other. Hollow Smoke, I've read multiple times now, and every time I love it even more. It is such a perfect fantasy book. This is my perfect fantasy book. Hands down. Feels like Skyrim. Feels like just the most beautiful world building you could ever experience, which then is just compounded in Dark Water Daughter. Is just so beautifully plotted and so wonderfully examined with the characters in it. Yes to this book forever, forever, and ever, and ever, and ever, and ever. This book was everything I wanted and more. Like, it is everything I love about Hannah's writing times a million, okay? Like, it's exactly what I want. Her world building, her mind. Hannah, I don't know how you think of this kind of stuff and how you can create like this, but this level of fantasy is my goal in life, is to one day write this level of fantasy, because like the world building in here is better than Brandon Sanderson's. And I've already gone off on a diatribe about his work in this video and in many other videos. She beats him out, in my opinion. I just read her books, please. read them, love them. All right, so this next one you guys know because it was on my previous list and I cannot move it. It's Percy Jackson. Why? Because Percy Jackson is one of my favorite worlds of all time, favorite series of all time. And I'm including specifically the first one because to me, the Lightning Thief represents the entire Percy Jackson world for me, and Rick Riordan will never do me wrong. Seriously. My favorite book in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series specifically is The Battle of the Labyrinth, but we're talking about this one today because it just is it. It is exactly the middle grade that I want. It is exactly the humor that I want. Percy is my favorite narrator I've ever come across. I will reread these books until I die. I will read them to my children. When that TV show comes out, I will lose my goddamn mind. Like, it just, the nostalgia is so real, even though I read these for the first time in high school. Like, I wish I had read them as a kid because they would have been my entire personality. They almost became my entire personality, even as a high schooler and adult when I read them again. Like, Rick is so good. This world is just my favorite, and I just, We're going to talk about these two next because they're kind of in the same category. They're both cozy fantasy. So number one, we have The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sango Mandana. This is becoming on the level for me as the other Bennett sister and the home feeling of that and the classics. Like, coming to this for a second time when I reread it earlier this year was the best decision I've ever had in my life. It feels like rewatching a comfort movie. When I read this one for the second time, it is everything I want in a romance. It is everything I want in an urban fantasy story. It's exactly it. The descriptions are perfect. The relationships in here perfect. I cannot find fault with this book ever, and no one can tell me otherwise. Please don't come and attack my favorite books ever. They have a place in my heart, and you'll never convince me to put them anywhere else, okay? The next one is Legends and Lattes. Of course it's Legends and Lattes. How could I not? This book inspired me to write my own fucking cozy fantasies. Like, this book is the reason that a second story exists and that A Little Luck is coming out later this year. It's the reason my book exists. And it opened up my favorite, like one of my favorite fantasy subgenres for me. It just is perfect. All right, I haven't reread this one and I'm planning to do so. This is probably going to be one of the ones that if I do that rereading favorites video is going to be in that one for sure, because I just want to live in this world again. I keep thinking about it all the time. And the second book in this series, it's not really the second, it's a prequel as well, is coming out in November. I'm so fucking excited for it. You guys have no idea. Like, Travis Baldry's writing is some of the most clean, crisp, to the point writing I've read. It reads so wonderfully. Yes, to cozy. Okay, let's talk now about this book specifically because this is not the actual book that I wanted to talk about. I'm currently lending that book to a friend, but I'm gonna hold up Nona the Ninth in place of Gideon the Ninth, first one in this series. I currently am lending it to my friend Sophia and also lending Harrow to her as well. And this is probably gonna go to her as soon as she's done Harrow, whenever she completes that feat of reading. But Gideon the Ninth, when I first read Gideon the Ninth, I didn't realize how much of an effect it was gonna have on me. And even when I got to the end of Gideon the Ninth for the first time, it didn't really have that big of an effect on me. The further I went away from reading it, and then when I came around and read it again, my love of it just kept growing. Like, I couldn't stop thinking about Gideon. And Gideon is one of my favorite characters of all time. I am so in love with her. The first book is just everything. Like, it's become a comfort place for me, which is so wild to say because it's like the wackiest shit. Harrow even more so, but that book is a comfort book for me. Maybe that's just what this list is. Like, it's just a bunch of comfort books for me. And I cannot wait to reread it. I already have plans to reread it again this fall because I need to. It's everything. It's sapphic. The narration style is wacky as shit. It's so fun. The audiobook narrator, Maura Quirk, is my favorite audiobook narrator of all time. I love her so much. Every time I come across a book and I'm like, oh my God, it's narrated by Maura Quirk. Like, Darkwater Daughter is narrated by Maura Quirk. It's my favorite thing ever. She's become a comfort voice for me, which is so funny. Like, I love Maura Quirk so much because of what she's done for me with the Gideon the Ninth and the Locked Tomb series. I am so in love with this book series. I'm so excited for fucking Electo the Ninth. You guys have no idea. Before we get to my favorite book of all time, we need to talk about two of my favorite trilogies of all time. Because for me, they are one reading experience altogether. There is no way to take them apart and tell you otherwise, okay? Because when I read these books and when I reread these books, it's all at once. All three of them in one go, because I cannot just read one, you know? First up, Lord of the Rings, and I'm holding up my new little babies that I got at the thrift store the other day, because look at how beautiful these little covers are. Yes, book one doesn't match book 2 and 3, but that's fine. The Lord of the Rings. This is one reading experience for me. If I go into the first one, I'm reading all three. There is no other way to do it, okay? You have to go all the way through. You have to start with Frodo and his little friends in the Shire, and you have to make sure that they get home okay. Like, you have to, okay? There is no other way to do it. I last reread this series in my bind up of Lord of the Rings. So like, to me, it's one book, okay? Tolkien is the father, is the grandfather of fantasy, however you want to say it. His worlds are the most influential fantasy worlds out there. You can feel his effect and his influence across the fantasy genre today. And it's one of my favorite things to read books, especially like going back to like the Wheel of Time and like books that were published after Lord of the Rings. You can feel how big of an influence Tolkien has had in those works. Even today, in like the wacky shit that we have, there's still Tolkien influence. But if you forced me to pick a favorite, after the last reread, my favorite was Return of the King. So number 3, but don't force me to pick a favorite because they're all my favorite. And then the other trilogy that is my favorite trilogy of all time, it recently beat out Lord of the Rings, which is crazy, and that is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, my friends. Why is this one reading experience? Because I read them all back to back to back this year. They are one and the same for me. I cannot pick them apart in my brain. I cannot tell you what each one of them is about because they are all the same. Just start to end, you know? Like, it's just one reading experience. This series is such a mastercraft on fantasy. It's a mastercraft on narration for me. And it's a mastercraft on characters and relationships and diverse worlds that just hit. Not even diverse in like the people and the characters, but the fact that the worlds itself are so diverse and incredible, okay? It's unreal. Favorite author of all time, favorite trilogy of all time. I will never stop talking about N.K. Jemisin. All right, my friends, we have talked about everything except for number 1. Now, that reading vlog that I want to do for these is gonna feature this one in it too, because it has been many years since I've read this book, and I want to make sure that it still holds this place as number 1 in my heart, because I'm a little scared that it doesn't, but I'm like 99% sure that it is. So that's why it's number 1 on this list. It's the only one that's technically in an order at all. Because how do you order your favorites? I could if I really thought about it, but damn, that would be difficult to do. The Starless by Erin Morgenstern. This book is everything that I love about stories. This book takes stories and puzzles and narration and puts them together in such a fantastic way. The lyricism in the writing, the mastercraft in the slow churning puzzle that's slowly coming together. It is everything. It is everything. The story at its core with Zachary Ezra Rollins, just, that's it for me. You know, it works so perfectly. And I know this book is not for everyone, which is why this is the one book that I love so much that I will never recommend it to anybody, because I know how many people either absolutely love it or absolutely hate this book because of the way that it's put together. Story within a story, within a story, within a story, the lyrical writing, all that kind of stuff. Like, if you want to delve into Erin Morgenstern's writing, but you're not sure if you're into this, go with The Night Circus, because that seems to be people's favorite out of the two. This one, my friends, is everything. I cannot wait to reread this book. Just looking at my annotations and my tabs from when I read it for the first time, it's insane. Like, what I remember coming out of this book with is, 1, it took me so long to read. I didn't want to rush it. It was one of those books, which is very rare if you've been on my channel for a while, because usually I like to read a book in one sitting, and if I don't, I get irritated at myself that I haven't been able to, because I want to be able to consume stories in one go real fast, because I know as a mood reader, sometimes I'm just not in the mood for that same story ever again, and I'll put it down and never pick it up again. So it's scary. I just want to like all at once. But this one, I think I read it over like a month, and I didn't want to speed it up at all. Like, I didn't want to try and go faster. It was the perfect story to just take in slowly and deliciously, as though you yourself are sinking into a sea of honey. Anyways, my friends, that is it. That is all. Those are my favorite books of all time, as of right now, as of 2023, as of August 2023, my friends. Let me know down below, as I asked, if you want to see that reading vlog for me, because I would love to know if it's at all interesting to you guys, and what your top 5 favorite books of all time are, if you can narrow it down. Any ordered top 5 books, if you can narrow it down. I would love to know, my friends, because I just love knowing what people's favorite books are. Okay, so I'm gonna now put this all back on my shelves, but thank you so much for watching. Favorite books are some of my favorite things, you know? Like thinking about books all day is my favorite thing. I love that I can do this now as a hobby and maybe one day as a job. Like just to have books in my life at all times is the best, okay? And I need you all to know that I just dropped Dark Water Daughter. These are my favorite books of all time. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you in another one very soon. Stay kind and keep on reading.